Okay, so thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for all your contributions to this wonderful effort. And we want to thank the Plummer Allen Green family for hosting the camp for 100 years. So big round of applause to them. And we want to thank the Slovenski family, Coach Peter and Dugan, for hosting this wonderful event for all of us to celebrate 100 years at the camp. And I'll turn it over to Coach Slovenski.
All right, all four of the boulders that have the plaques on them they're all from the camp property. We had to search a while. There are a lot of rocks on the property, but not many big boulders like this. So we searched around a while and found some nice boulders. And then I thought that would be the biggest challenge, is finding the boulders. But then wrestling them out of the earth from way out toward the cove and way down in the gravel pit. David Allen was brilliant with the backhoe, wrestling these things, because honestly the biggest ones are right at the weight limit for the backhoe that he has. And he'd get them up here, and we got them in position. And then I started asking around for someone to attach the plaques to. We got the plaques printed at a place in Florida, and they came back beautifully. And then to attach them to the rocks, well, is a big job, really tough. And I checked with the first engraving guy who came in. He said couldn't do it, and he left. Second guy came in and said no one will do it, and he left. But then luckily a guy from Gray, the third one we invited in, he sort of got into the project. He's got two kids who are sort of camp age. I think he liked the camp. And so he did this grinding that gets the space in a rock for the plaques, and we were able to put them here. And we were first thinking about making these monuments to these terrific people who set up the camp. I can't remember the order exactly, but certainly Lex Sheldon was a top one, and then I think James Cross. And then we thought of Major Bigelow. Nothing here elsewhere, nothing else here is named for Major Bigelow, and I feel like Major Bigelow is like the George Washington, the founding father of the camp. So then we've got, and David Plummer was easy to add. When you eat lunch, you'll see the great wooden counter in the dining hall that was made by David Plummer and endures in such great condition. And so much of the infrastructure of the camp was built and supported by David Plummer. And then you see the nice one for, I think that's Lex Sheldon's, and James Cross's over there. So it's like the Mount Rushmore area of camp, and with these four terrific people. Round of applause for these great people.
Okay, so we invited some of the family members to speak briefly about their honoree. And up first is Bill Bigelow, who was in my cabin in 1963 and 64 with Jeff Kressler and Peter Lum, and he's returning for the first time in 50 some odd years. So he's got a little speech written up. And thank you, Bill.
Hello all. Thank you for that warm welcome and for being here to help us celebrate the founding of Camp Hawthorne, the camp which was established in 1920, what was essentially 100 years ago. I'm Bill Bigelow, nicknamed Corporal Bigelow, when I was a camper here at Camp Hawthorne in 1963 and 64. This is a direct result of being related to my great uncle, the camp's founder, Major Elliott Bigelow. The Major was my father, Scott Bigelow's uncle, my dad being a longtime camper here in the 1920s and 1930s. And luckily he passed his fantastic experience here on to me. The Major hailed from Brooklyn, New York, had just left the Signal Corps when he flew over this majestic area and looking down said, "It is here that I'll build my camp." Which is exactly what he did with the help of his family, who had a successful wool business back in Brooklyn. He promptly named his camp after one of the area's most prestigious residents, the author Nathaniel Hawthorne, who had lived nearby in Raymond as a child and a young man. Of course, it was Hawthorne who gave us the Scarlet Letter, the House of Seven Gables. He once said of this wonderful place, "The moonlight is sculpture, sunlight is painting." As a boy, I arrived at this camp, like so many, traveling a great distance, in my case, from suburban Chicago to New York City, where my aunt met me at the airport, then dropped me off at Port Authority for the bus ride here, knowing no one. I became instantly frightened, near tears with loneliness, during the long ride from New York to Maine. After making it here and having dinner, I dove deep down into my sleeping bag and wept myself to sleep. My loneliness was quickly replaced the following morning by the fresh air of Maine, the crush of the woods, the brilliance of the lake, and the great good friendship of so many other campers. We were all quickly filled with fun and mischief and the endless activities of camp. Tennis on the old clay courts, swimming in the impossibly cold lake, archery, rifle practice, arts and crafts, sailing, volleyball, baseball on the field, and friendship. The great thrill of newly discovered friendship, and all which that includes, from a shared understanding of the world as we saw it to great peals of youthful laughter. I remember playing tennis one humid afternoon in a camp tournament we had. I was up against Jim Brennan, and he beat me. A close match, but I was convinced I was a better player. So I cajoled Jim into playing a second set, a set I won, which allowed me to advance in the tournament. Of course, I felt like a heel after that, and as I lay in my sleeping bag that night, alone with my thoughts, I resolved to never do anything like that again. It was from this experience that I learned from Jim the great importance not of competition and winning, but of sportsmanship. To this day, when I play tennis, if the ball is even just kind of close to the line, when my opponent hits it, I always call it in. The feeling that gives me is so much more fulfilling than winning. I learned that from Jim and from being at this camp, and I never shall forget it. But it wasn't just the rules of sport which taught me so much. It's the unexpected moments in sports which helps define us. I remember my time on the baseball field when I was dropped into the place where my talents truly lay, right field. We were playing another camp. I don't recall the name of that camp, but I was happily off in right, my mind wandering and drifting in the summer sun, as it often did back then. When I heard the distant crack of the bat and a roar from the other campers, that's all I heard until there was a sound of the plop of the ball as it landed about 6 feet from where I stood. I had the presence of mind to walk over and pick up the ball, hurling it back to the infield over the cheers and groans I heard coming my way. Our camp coach was waving his arms like mad along the third base line, screaming to me, "Bigelow! Hey, Bigelow! What are you doing out there? Picking your nose?" He was gesturing wildly, mimicking a person picking his nose, just in case I missed the point. It was from this experience that I learned to pay deep attention to whatever it was that I was doing, a lesson which I've also never forgotten to this day. I learned the great lesson of discipline from my time at Camp Hawthorne. We had this challenge where we had to accomplish a number of tasks under the watchful eyes of our counselors, all sorts of athletic challenges mostly. And if you completed all the tasks that you were assigned, you were awarded a letter, a big block H, a sign of achievement which you'd proudly have sewn onto the front of your camp jacket. If you won your letter, you got to head off to Old Orchard, a wonderfully exciting amusement park with all the other letter holders in attendance, a genuine end of camp treat. I was determined to be one of those letter holders in my first year. I had checked off everything except a solo swim out to the island, a monumental task if there ever was one, especially in the frigid waters of the lake. A counselor would row in front of you in an old wooden rowboat, oars dipping gently into the water as he exhorted you on. I remember I did my swim late one day near the end of the camp term as the sun was setting. After I made it to the island and crawled out of the freezing water, huffing and puffing, grabbing a rock as proof of my journey, I jumped into the back of the rowboat, a towel draped over my shoulders, teeth chattering in the cold, as the counselor rowed us back to the campgrounds. Not a word coming from me, just the deep sense of having stuck to it, of having accomplished something that once seemed impossible. To this day, that served me well as a writer, a profession where hard work and discipline is even more important maybe than talent, as it is with so many things in life. Finally, I remember the end of my first year when all the campers were in the mess hall, a place where we went 3 times a day to ravenously eat what I was sure was the best food ever served up. On the final day, the cooks were brought out from the kitchen, 2 older women and an older man. I'll never forget the thunderous applause that went up when they were introduced. I learned in that indelible moment the great lesson of gratefulness, and have always been present to express it. Even today, when I go to a restaurant, if the cooks and chefs are even remotely visible, I always find my way to them so I can personally give thanks for being fed so well and for their hard work. And so I learned the precious gift of gratitude here at Camp Hawthorne as well. So it is not only for these great grounds which we pay tribute to our camp's founder, Major Bigelow, on this August day in 2021. We offer our thanks to him for the ethos he built, for the manner in which all that he created turned boys into men, where character was molded and refined more than anything else. I know there are girls here now, but I'm talking about my era. This was the case for me 60 years ago, and I can only believe it has been the case for countless other campers ever since. It is my hope and belief that this tradition will continue for yet another 100 years. The real living legacy of Camp Hawthorne and my great uncle, Major Elliott Bigelow, is not me. It's all that was imprinted so deeply under the hearts and minds of the innumerable young people who have walked these woods and swum these waters, for all that was taught to us, directly or indirectly, in order to make us better citizens of the world. And so from me, Corporal William Bigelow, a descendant of our camp's founder, to Major Elliott Bigelow, I simply say, thank you, sir.
Next up we have David Plummer, Plaque, and Bill Sheldon is going to say a few words. And David, if you want to say anything.
Here we can get, can I get a, how do you start and say what I know all about? To give you information about me, I was blessed to not only come to a special camp, but to have my parents here for all the 20 years that I was here, from age 2 to age 21. Peter, thank you so much. This is, I'm going to start getting emotional. What wonderful feelings we have. And I mention we because we're the beneficiaries of Bill Bigelow and his great uncle. Is that right?
Yep.
What we've learned, Peter, is that Dave Plummer wasn't just the expert cabinet maker. Dave Plummer was a staffman in the sense of the true camp. How many of us were touched by Dave Plummer's legacy? I know I was, and there are innumerable people. This fellow Frank Exline, who put the Model T together. Dave Plummer, if you look at every picture of every camp staff, he's front and center. He was just as much on the staff as any other counselor here. But he was also shoveling the snow off the lodge. And actually, in the end, I think David knows this, in '69 when I was finishing my senior year or junior year at college, we came up here and we shoveled, because Dave wasn't able to, snow off the roof of the garage. What do you say? Whenever something needed to be fixed, Major Bigelow connected with Dave Plummer, and Dave, they made it. It was fixed. It was done. And then it gets even more special because friendship is something we all know about, don't we? And we were all thrown together as strangers, and yet after it's all, we all became tremendous, friends over such a special time. And then, let's be blunt. What's the highest emotion? Love. Love. How do we feel about this place? It's pretty special. But it's interesting because it's special to each one of us in a different way. And then, okay, I woke up this morning and I said, how many cumulative years are there of people that are going to be very significantly involved here today? Are you ready for this? That plaque, the plaque that's honoring all that gave. Do you know how many, Jim? I had to keep you quiet for a moment. Over 900.
Wow.
Cumulatively, collectively, all of us have 900 years of living here in the summer. Now that's just a small few that know about this. Yeah. So it's hard to summarize what went on here. It's special and wonderful. There's if you will, I think maybe surprising to Coach Slovenski, a rebirth of the people that were here for those special years before you were here. And I'd just like to say, on behalf of my father, I've been accused of having some traits like him. For those who never knew him, for those who never knew him, yes, it's all good, but he had the line, like you do, Peter, that, we all know you crossed it, you were in big trouble. He had this way of floating into camp at night to find out who was in camp or not. He fell asleep in one of the counselors' beds when the counselor snuck out of camp. He allowed, I was talking to John McGuire about these trips that he really took that were a little extreme, 60 miles in one day of paddling a canoe. But he held to standards of teaching and of giving you all gifts that you could carry with you for the rest of your life. And as the plaque says, we're all living a better life in his honor. So I want to thank you so much for this, Peter, and all of you. And let's have fun.
Next up is Frank Exline from 1943 at camp till 1944. And he's going to say a few words on Dave Plummer.
I just wanted to add a little bit on Dave Plummer, who was as much of a part of my camp experiences as the great staff and my friends and everything. And that, for example, I was terrible at baseball. If I was assigned baseball, I would go off and see what Dave was doing during that period, rather than stand in right field hoping nobody was going to hit at me. So anyway, and also part of the things that he would take care of was these wonderful old buses they had, two Rio trucks that he would be tinkering with that I was fascinated with. I'm still fascinated by old cars. And the first, in 1950, for 2 summers, I was kitchen help. At the time, I'd been a scholarship kid under Bigelow, and so I worked 2 years as kitchen help and then became a counselor for a year. But the first kitchen help year, I found a Model T Ford in the barn up there. And I looked at it, the engine was in it and everything, and I said, I'm going to get that running. And I sent away for a book from Floyd Clymer, and Dave was quietly, helpful. He never actually did anything. But when the book came and I said, I'm going to work on this, he said, oh, here's a few tools that I had lying around, like some wrenches and stuff. And then when I saw that it needed coils and plugs, well, I'm going into town, and he went to Montgomery Ward, and I gave him the cash, and he bought spark coils and plugs for it, and I wired it up, and then he just happened to go to the town garage, and he says, "Oh, my friend at the garage sent you this." It gave me cans of oil, settled crankcase drippings, that they'd skim and reuse, and so I had oil for it. For the tires, we just stuffed pine cones and needles into the existing tires that had been sitting on for 15 years. It was a 1925 Ford. This was 1950. Anyway, to make a long story short, got it together, and Dave at his Model A pickup towed me all around the baseball field for a couple of hours to no avail, and hauled it back up in front of the barn, and the following morning, I was in despair, but I went up and set it all and cranked it, and it came to life. And I was running around screaming, and I got in it, and I'd learned how to drive it from the book, and I drove it down to past the tennis court where Lex was playing tennis. And he was completely flabbergasted, because everybody knew I was working on it, and nobody except Dave thought it would ever run. And he'd been such a mentor without ever touching it. It was my project. Oh, one of the wheels was missing, and he found one under his wood pile at home. And also that summer, he was driver's ed, because I'd asked, I loved the Model A Ford, the station wagon, that was used to haul the camp trash box all the way around the lake. So that was my, I would ride with him. I mean, I would drive it and he would ride with me, and that was a weekly ritual for 2 years. I still love Model A's. I have a 29 sedan sitting outside my house right now. Anyway, he was a wonderful mentor and a wonderful guy, and a great part of my camp experience. Anyway, thank you.
David, you want to add anything? You're okay. Okay. And Connie and Sarah Cross on their father, James Cross. Would you like to say anything?
You go first. I concede to my older sister first. Well, first of all, we are deeply grateful for this honor for our dad, who loved this place. He loved everything about it. He, I think, first came in 28 or something? I don't know, like 29, and was here for maybe 9 years. He loved the place, he loved the trees, he loved the lake, he loved all the activities that he learned to do here. Swimming, canoeing, sailing, passed them on to us, and also the tradition of going to camp. And it might be interesting to know that Sarah and I were the first girls to ever attend Camp Hawthorne. We were 8 and 5 that summer. At the end of the camp season, as you probably read on the plaque, the parents of boys in Brooklyn, New York implored Major Bigelow to keep the camp open because there was a polio epidemic raging in the city, and they wanted the boys to be safe here in Maine. And Major Bigelow asked our dad to be the camp doctor. We still don't know why, because there had never been a camp doctor at Camp Hawthorne, but we are surmising that maybe he wanted to pick Dad's brain to see who might succeed him as the director. And we're pretty sure that it was Dad who would have said Lex Sheldon, because they were best buddies. But in any case, Sarah and I, for 2 weeks, were Camp Hawthorne campers, and I think we were the first ones ever to be here. Given Major Bigelow's aversion to having women set foot on the property, except if you could be a cook. But Dad also loved the people here, and in particular, he adored Dave Plummer. And he followed Dave around and learned how to fix things. He learned how to build things. He learned how to wire things. And later on, Sarah and I would say, Daddy, how do you know how to fix that? He'd say, well, Dave Plummer taught me. That was another wonderful skill that he picked up at Camp Hawthorne. And later on, Dave and Alice Plummer invited him to come to the wedding of their daughter, Davetta, and Dad and I had the pleasure of coming to Davetta's wedding in, what year was that?
58.
What was it?
58.
58.
63
Wow.
years ago.
And of course, I can't not mention Lex Sheldon. Lex and my dad were best friends from Poly Prep in Brooklyn. They were knot tying champions in Brooklyn together as Boy Scouts. And they were, of course, best friends here at camp and remained the best friends until Dad died. And how honored he would have been to know that Lex made an Honor Camper Award after him, as we were. We were very honored by that as well. I should also mention that after my parents built a cottage across the lake here, Dad and Bill Sheldon would play echo taps at night. And Dad played the trumpet, and Sarah and I used to roll our eyes because Dad would string those notes out as long as he could, and we said, he's so sentimental. And then we'd hear this wonderful echo from across the lake where Bill would be playing on was it the trumpet or the bugle? It was just beautiful. And maybe some of you who were here then remember that. So thank you all for this honor. We are so grateful. Thank you. And Sarah will probably want to say something.
Well, the only things I can add to that is how grateful and humbled we are that our dad was selected to be honored along with these major, no pun intended, dignitaries. And our dad, Connie mentioned how he learned so much from Dave Plummer, but literally one of the things that I remember his saying most around our house was, Dave Plummer taught me everything I know about doing things. And we've since learned, because is it your nephew? Anyway, where's David?
He's back here.
Right, okay, that David has Dave's diaries, and that he learned how close Dave felt to my dad. And that just meant the most to us to learn that. We assumed that might be so, but you know, it never is in your full imagination until you hear it directly quoted. So that was really important too. And, well, we could tell all kinds of stories and hijinks that we did because of our close relationship to Camp Hawthorne, including wearing sheets, unpacking our canoe down at the cove, and running through camp at night playing you-know-who. But that was the intention. However, we chickened out, unfortunately. But it was a great idea, and we knew we were going to have a lot of fun and probably get into real trouble. But that didn't bother us at that age, so we were just as glad that we could get out of that one. At any rate, there are many other fun stories of hijinks at Hawthorne. That could be a whole separate, I'm sure, from all of you, knowing the things that we did at our girls' camp over on Sebago. Many hijinks, much fun, and not only that, but all the things that people have said about how it formed us as human beings who are caring, loving, taking care of nature, giving people. So thank you all, and thank you for letting us have this honor of these wonderful monuments here. I'm just really blown over by it. Thank you, Peter. And thank you to Jim.